G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with the conclusion of The Outsiders,
There has been a bit of
followed by First Moondog.
doing that with non-financial members being counted. Remember that little scandal a few years ago with Big Bill Ludwig in Queensland about...
I'm sure this will come out in full detail at the Royal Commission. Just a final point, Shalila. I mean, that Bill Shorten appearing at that Royal Commission, is that a thing the opposition leader can easily survive?
Well, look, at the moment it's working very well for him because it gives him an out to not answer any questions about it. He was asked constantly yesterday in the press conference. Well, it won't last, but as soon as he fronts, he won't be able to do that anymore. But at the moment, it's great for him because he keeps saying, well, look, I'm happy to front this. I've said many times I'm happy to front this Royal Commission, and until then I won't be saying anything.
Well,
so
all of this will unfold. Time is against us here, but
just
very quickly.
I think it's instructive, though, that you've had former Prime Minister Gillard had to give evidence. Now you've had Bill Shorten. Now it was going to get Gillard. It didn't. I mean, let's see what actually happens.
We will see. Sadly, we have to leave it there because the dog is warming up as we speak. Thanks to Ian Heckey, Shalila Medora and Tim Lyons. But it is almost 6 to 10.
Hello, patriots. Welcome to First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living. I'm Walkley Award-winning cartoonist for The Guardian Australia, First Dog on the Moon. What about opposition leader Bing Pootles? Oh, I'm so funny. I do that joke every week. Burnt crouton, blank panties. Oh, that guy, whatever his name is, he's so terrible. Bill, that's it. His whole small target strategy drives me nuts. Australia just wants him to go up to Tony Abbott and poke him in the chest and say, you know what, Tony? You are bad and your government is bad. Everything about you is bad, bad, bad. Something that looks even a tiny bit like it might have accidentally tripped over in a puddle of accountability and ruined its shoes. That's all we want. That'd be nice, Bill. Oh, but no, blam, he's on board with national security, he's on board with data retention, he's even on board with jailing doctors who dob in how terrible we are to asylum seekers. And now, it turns out when he was Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union, they totally shafted their members in order to get money for the union. What is the point of a union if it doesn't stand up for its members? This guy, Bent Spoonbill, he's almost as bad as the Prime Minister, almost as bad as Peter Dutton. Oh, but don't get me started on those guys. Oh, my God. This week, we found out the Immigration Department are actually paying people smugglers to unsmuggle people back to Indonesia. We're not smashing the people smugglers' business model. We're financing it. If Tony Abbott was here, I'd walk right up to him and I'd stick my... Wait, what is that? Bernard, what's going on?
You've set off one of the bias alarms. I think it's probably... Oh, look out. It's Mr. Flippington. He's from the Content Balance Directorate.
Good morning, Mr. On the Moon.
You can't come in here. I'm doing live radio.
Not anymore, Mr. On the Moon. Your current broadcast has been rerouted to digital radio, so no one is listening. Radio National is currently broadcasting an interview with Yoldet Furselpink, an academic from Brooklyn, New Jersey, who recently uncovered long-lost recordings from the 1920s of the Tibetan yak choirs of Yucatan.
I don't understand.
Mr. On the Moon, your program is going very well. Yes, we do monitor it at the head office. However, when you move from criticism of the opposition leader, and I believe you have criticised him in the ALP 11 times in the past 18 months, when you move to another strident critique of the Conservative government, which you have done previously 278 times, 132 of those in a row, you set off every alarm in the Content Balance Directorate's central control room. The Bias Finder 3000 even caught fire. Mr. Scott will not be pleased. He's been using it to make delicious soy chai. We don't like heavy-handed editorial oversight of our content creators, Mr. On the Moon. However, There are times when it is necessary to intervene.
Oh, come on. It's the government. They're so awful. And look, the main problem with Blob Hot Pants.
Yes, very funny, Mr. On the Moon. Do go on.
Whenever I talk about the opposition leader, there's nothing to say. It's much more fun bagging the government. They're so completely terrible. And there's way more material. Bum stippling is so boring.
Oh, Mr. On the Moon, there's nothing wrong with a bit of well-balanced tedium. This is Radio National after all. Your current ratio, however, is quite skewed.
Oh, it's not that bad. I did Eurovision a few weeks ago. That's a neutral subject.
I believe the Tony Abbott is going to be fired into the Sun Brass Band, featured prominently in that episode.
Oh, well, and then
a week later you did Peter Dutton, King of the Pooh People. I admit that was quite entertaining, but it's not the point. You need to mock the ALP, at least as often as the government. And not just that. Dare I mention
The what?
the Greens.
The Greens?
Yes, the Greens.
But mocking those gentle folk, that's just not fair. They don't have senses of humour. They wouldn't get the jokes. It would just hurt their little marsupial feeling.
The point is, Mr. On the Moon, here at the ABC, we need to be equal opportunity mockers. You need to hang shit on everyone, even the Greens. Stop that.
Sorry.
Remember, Mr. On the Moon, you don't want to be brought up in...
No, not that. Anything but that.
Yes, so that's it for RN Sunday Extra this morning. The Sunday Extra podcast. That is your friend if you've missed anything on iTunes.
Well, it's been one of those weeks where everything just continues ploughing along in the same furrow that it was ploughing along the week before. George Brandis, the Federal Attorney General, kept on whinging and whining and moaning and groaning and grizzling and complaining that the Human Rights Commissioner, Gillian Triggs, is actually standing up for the human rights of refugees because that's her job. It's what her government charter is requiring her to do. And it means that if she finds that the Australian government is in fact harming the refugees by trampling all over their human rights, then she is required by law to say so publicly and up front. The government says that that is her playing partisan politics because she's criticising the government. That got a lot of press all week. The fact that every international human rights expert, consultant, practitioner, observer agrees with Gillian Triggs and nobody agrees with the government doesn't seem to cut much ice with the government. We also had Tony Abbott once again shooting his mouth off and proving how slim, how tenuous is the connection between his worldview and reality when he stood up there and he said that ISIL is a death cult that is coming personally looking for you unless it is stopped by confiscating people's citizenships and blah, blah, blah. And he cited that man Haron Manis, who went cracker shit in the Lint Cafe, was acting on the instructions of ISIL, even though the committee of inquiry being run by the New South Wales cops and the Australian federal cops and the Australian version of the No Such Agency, they've all found that there was no actual connection between the bloke who held up the cafe and ISIL, apart from the fact that he wrote to George Brandis asking written permission to write to the head of ISIL. That letter apparently went round in circles in the Prime Minister's office and didn't make it to the inquiry, although the Foreign Minister, I think it was, misled Parliament and said that the letter was made available to the inquiry. So that Tony Abbott is playing the Middle Eastern ISIL phenomena for votes. He's trying to dog whistle the the great Australian fear of outsiders coming to invade us and dispossess us and usurp our existing laws and form of government. And it's pretty clear to see that Australians has this national gestalt paranoia, because that's exactly what Australia did to bring itself into existence. Turned up on boats and completely disrupted and dispossessed and devastated all existing forms of social order, and then pretended that no such order ever used to exist. So there's a lot of people in Australia whose grandparents were fearful of the yellow peril coming from China, which is, part of the reason they had the slogan "populate or perish," and decided that lots of people had to go and live in the northern end of Australia so that the wicked, evil, slanty-eyed, yellow-skinned, black-haired people who all looked the same weren't going to come and take it away from us. It's also why when the Japanese bombed Darwin from aircraft carriers and from Timor, there were people running away from Darwin to Alice Springs and finishing up in Melbourne because they were certain that the Japanese were going to invade, because Australians as a society are terrified of invasion. So Tony Abbott can bang that fear of the outsider drum, and he can sustain himself in a political environment in which everything is turning to shit around him. They're sitting on a highly inflated, stretched out housing bubble in both Sydney and Melbourne. Business confidence is sort of continuing to spiral downwards. The budget alleged boost to small business by letting them claim $20,000 as an instant tax write-off on anything that they bought for their business, that sort of failed because it was specifically targeted at small businesses which turn over less than $2 million per annum, and they're all the same small businesses where the managing director is getting paid $80,000 because if he gets any more, he goes into the next tax bracket. And he manages the business so that it's lucky to make $120 worth of net profit every 3 months. So if you make $500 a year profit, you haven't got $20,000 that you can spend on a new anything to boost the economy, because you don't pay $20,000 worth of tax. You're lucky to pay $100 worth of tax, company tax. So yeah, that smoke and mirrors pea and thimble game with no pea under any of the thimbles, that didn't work real well. So they're jumping up and down on Bill Shorten, and if Bill Shorten did genuinely transact a lousy deal for the workers because the bosses kicked into the union funds, and there have been rumours of this for many, many moons, if that's what happened, and if the Labor Party has been stupid enough to put somebody with that kind of skeleton hanging in their cupboard in the leader's seat, as well as having a comb over and being utterly unmemorable, the idiot's got secrets that he has to try and keep covered up. If the Labor Party's put him in there as their leader, well, they kind of deserve whatever sort of drubbing Tony Abbott's going to give them. As I said previously, every country gets the government that they deserve. How many people who got cooked as hamburgers by the RAF in 1943 were happily voting and cheering for Hitler from 1933 all the way up to 1943 when they got cooked? Interesting question, isn't it? What responsibility personally does the individual citizen bear for the actions of their government, dependent on how fervently they support bad shit being done in their name? I think they had an inquiry called the Nuremberg trials to figure that one out. I wonder whether Tony Abbott will ever join John Howard at a war crimes trial as defendants. Johnny Howard got us involved in invading Iraq. Tony Abbott's trying to invade the caliphate. We shall see what we shall see. Approaching the upload limit. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Hope you enjoyed the jump cut kangaroos at the introduction to the Outsiders. Ciao.